Have you ever been scrolling through your feed or maybe looking for a new movie and just had that feeling, has everything already been done before? Well, today we're going to dig into a really powerful idea from Japanese cultural theory that might just explain our entire modern world of media.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Blockbuster movies that feel like they're just checking off a list of familiar tropes. TikTok trends that just endlessly recycle the same sounds, the same formats. It's this weird, nagging sense that we're all just living in an echo chamber of reboots, sequels, and copies of copies. So what's the deal? Is originality just dead, or is there something else going on entirely?
To get to the bottom of this, we're not going to look at last week's big movie release. Nope. We're actually going to go back a few decades to a place where this whole phenomenon was spotted really early on: Japanese otaku, or fan culture.
So there's this cultural critic, Hiroki Azuma, and he noticed something absolutely fascinating. He saw that a lot of anime and manga weren't really referencing the real world anymore. Instead, they were just referencing other anime and manga. He called these things simulacra, which is a fancy way of saying they're copies of copies, where the original has gotten totally lost in the mix. This is exactly what he means by a chain of infinite imitations.
And okay, this is where it gets really weird. Let's take the super famous anime series Evangelion. In one episode, the show introduced this alternate reality, and it had a new version of a really popular character. But here's the crazy part. That new version was actually a parody of an image that fans had already created and were passing around as fan art. Think about that for a second. The original work started imitating its own copies. So what kind of model could possibly explain this strange looping world?
So how on earth do we make sense of this? Well, Azuma gives us these two really powerful models to understand this huge shift in culture, what he calls the tree and the database.
Okay, so on the left, you've got the tree model. This is how we thought about culture for centuries. The idea is that there's this deep, underlying structure, a grand narrative that gives meaning to everything we see on the surface. You can picture it like a giant tree, right? The trunk is the main story, and all the little branches are just different expressions of that same core. But on the right, we have the database model. And here, the trunk is just gone. There's no single deep story anymore. Instead, what you have is this huge floating collection of traits, tropes, and ideas that can be pulled from and remixed into something new.
So in the tree model, your identity, the meaning of a story, it's all determined for you by that grand narrative. It could be a national ideology, a religious belief, a big philosophical idea, whatever. You're basically a branch, and you're fundamentally connected to and shaped by that big trunk.
But in the database model, that whole relationship gets flipped on its head. We aren't being determined by one big story anymore. Instead, we actively read up or, pull different elements from the database to build our own small, temporary narratives. We become the curators of our own meaning.
And listen, this isn't just an anime thing. It's actually reflecting a much bigger cultural shift that philosophers call the decline of the grand narrative. It's basically the idea that those big, unifying stories that used to hold society together, big ideas about nation or religion or progress, they've started to lose their power. And in their place, what do we get? A massive collection of smaller stories, or, as Azuma would call it, a database.
Okay, so that's the big theory. But how does this database thing actually work in practice? I mean, how do you build something new, not from some grand idea, but just from a collection of parts?
Well, let's look at the building blocks. In otaku culture, these are called mo elements. Now, mo is a Japanese term that's kind of hard to translate, but it's that feeling, that emotional rush of affection and excitement you get for a fictional character. So mo elements are the specific little traits that are designed to trigger that feeling. Things like a certain hairstyle, a type of outfit, or a specific personality type. They're like little emotional shortcuts.
And for the perfect example, meet Digicharit. She was originally created just to be a mascot for a store. She had no story, no world, nothing behind her. But she was a huge success. Why? Because she wasn't an original character in the old school sense. Instead, she was just an incredibly effective combination of pre-existing, popular mo elements that were pulled directly from the cultural database of the late 90s. She was built, not born.
And get this wasn't just some abstract idea. It was literally how people were engaging with media back then. This is a search interface from a fan art site in 1996. You didn't search for art by the artist's name. No, you searched by combining traits, the mo elements themselves. This proves that everyone, from creators to fans, was already thinking in these database terms.
So this brings us to a huge, kind of mind-bending implication of the database model. Once you start thinking in terms of remixable parts, instead of these sacred, untouchable originals, well, that line between just consuming media and actually creating it starts to completely dissolve.
Check out this example, the Bikkerimon sticker phenomenon in Japan. So there was this official set of 772 character stickers, but what happens if a fan creates a 773rd sticker, one that perfectly fits the style and the whole vibe of the originals? In the old tree model, it's a fake, right? A knockoff. But in the database model, because it successfully draws from the same set of rules and elements, it has just as much value as the official ones. The fan has just become a creator.
This totally changes how we judge creative work. The question isn't, is this an authentic original anymore? The question is now, is this a good combination of elements from the database? A successful derivative work isn't the one that just copies the source perfectly. It's the one that really understands the database it comes from and uses those parts in a clever or satisfying new way.
Now, I know this might all seem like it's just about some niche fan culture from decades ago in Japan. But the reason this model is so powerful is that this database logic, well, it went mainstream. It basically describes how our entire global culture operates now.
I mean, just think about it for a second. The Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's a gigantic database of characters, plot points, and powers, all constantly being remixed. TikTok trends, they are literally built on a database of shared sounds, filters, and formats. Even when you create a character in a video game, you're just pulling from a database of features. We are all constantly consuming and creating by pulling from these massive, shared pools of data.
So, the ultimate takeaway here is a fundamental shift in power. In the old world, the author was this godlike figure, creating a universe from scratch. But in the database world, that power has been completely decentralized. The author's role is different now. The elements themselves, the cat ears, the superhero tropes, the viral sounds, they are what hold the power. And the most successful creators today aren't necessarily geniuses of pure invention, but masters of combination.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. In a world of database consumption, where we're all just pulling from the same pile of remixable parts, what is the new role of the author? Is it just to find the most surprising combinations? Or is it still possible for a truly new grand narrative to emerge from the noise? That's something to think about the next time you're scrolling. Thanks for watching.